everyone. My name is Danny Nierenberg. I'm president of Food Tank. It's my sincere honor to be moderating today's panel on refreshing the food system that really looks at the intersection of food and agriculture with technology. Before I introduce our amazing panelists, I just want to set the stage a little bit for our discussion. Big data and artificial intelligence and all of the high and low technologies that are now being used by farmers, scientists, researchers, extension workers, businesses, and policymakers will have implications, both good and bad, for how we produce and consume food. And we have really important questions about who benefits, who has control of data, or the outcomes of research done with different technologies, and how the technologies themselves are being implemented. Are they being developed in a participatory way that includes farmers and other stakeholders from the very beginning? And also, do these technologies actually solve problems that farmers and consumers need solved? This is part of an ongoing discussion that Food Tank, my organization, is having with a project that we're spearheading called the Refresh Working Group, which includes technology companies like Google, farmers, entrepreneurs, chefs, and other stakeholders who are working to ask these really difficult questions. And we know that these conversations will continue to evolve as we learn more about the costs and benefits and the opportunities and challenges that will come from different uses of technology on how we produce, harvest, distribute, cook, serve, consume, and dispose of food. And I'm really excited for our group of panelists today. There's really no better group to have this discussion. I will just introduce them briefly. First, we have Dr. Marian. She's been a lifelong leader for the Food for Health movement and is an expert on nutrition, dietary choices, and food policy. And she's often a voice of reason when it comes to talking about food and nutrition and what agricultural policies should look like and who should benefit. Next, we have Joy Chevalier, who is the owner of the Cook's Nook, a shared kitchen and culinary incubator for artisans, mobile food vendors, and caterers. Joy has worked extensively as an e-commerce product manager and marketing director for internet venture startups and Fortune 500 companies. And she is joining us from Austin. And I also should have mentioned that Marian is joining us from Ithaca, New York. And I'm also excited to introduce Don Bustos, who is a farmer in New Mexico, where he's working on the land that his family has farmed on for more than 400 years. He serves on the board of the Acequia Association, which protects and preserves land for future generations. Thank you all so much for being here. It's really wonderful to have you all as part of this discussion. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start with Marian. And you know, we've talked a lot in the past about how you feel about technology. And in your most recent book, Let's Ask Marian, you talk a little bit about your general skepticism, but how you also try to be very open-minded about learning more about how technology can benefit farmers and consumers. And you visited Aero Farms, which is based in New Jersey. It's a very large hydroponic facility. But before, maybe you describe that visit, I'm wondering if you can tell me why you're skeptical. What makes you nervous about some of these technologies?
Well, it doesn't always work. That's part of it. I'm a technological skeptic, in part because I'm technologically challenged. I didn't grow up with it. It's I'm the wrong generation for this kind of thing. But I think the real problem is that I think most of the problems in the food system are problems that have to do with social relations, with economics, with politics, with society. And I don't think that you can solve societal problems with technology. You have to solve societal problems by making social changes in general. So that's my kind of general framework for it. At the same time, I'm constantly being asked to speak at technology conferences, and I try to stay as open-minded as I can about them. I think one of the things I write about in Let's Ask Marian is the plant-based food options. These are technological solutions to the problems of eating too much meat, the effects of beef production on climate change and on human health. This is a technological solution to this problem Whereas I think, if you don't want to eat meat, just don't eat meat. It's not all that hard to do. And I'm not sure that developing an ultra processed food product, which these artificial meats are, is a solution to that problem. We don't know the answer to that yet. I'm trying to stay as open-minded as I can. I have to say that AeroFarm was a real inspiration to me about this, because the greens that were grown under these hydroponic, not exactly hydroponic conditions, but the way they're doing them in trays, spraying the roots, they tasted really good. For me, the proof is always in how do these things taste? And these greens were distinguishable by what kind they were. You could tell what you were eating. They were pricing them at whatever the market price is for these kinds of greens. The big problem is the energy use.
Sure.
They haven't demonstrated that they are economically viable yet, because the cost of the energy that's used to keep these things going is so high. These are problems that still have to be worked out. And, we have to wait and see how all of these things play out. I think it's too early to say one way or the other. But I remain skeptical. That's my job, is to be skeptical.
Absolutely. So, Dawn, I'm hoping I can turn to you now. I wonder if you, as a farmer, share sort of the general skepticism that Marian also has around technology. I know you are part of the Refresh working group and have had these really difficult but also exciting discussions of where technology can take food and agriculture. But what are you maybe most skeptical about?
I echo what Marian just said also, is that there is this whole idea of technology is the silver bullet, and it's going to save us out there. And in actuality, there's cases all the time that prove that there is unintended consequences that occur with the development of these types of technology. And until we can understand all those unintended consequences, it's better to rely on trusted kind of activity that has occurred. Here in New Mexico, we irrigate, as you mentioned, with the acequia system. And the acequia system was one of the first forms of democracy in the United States. So it speaks directly to that social context. You have to know your neighbors. You have to be really in touch with what the creator provided of the natural resources. There has to be a symbiotic relationship between the environment, humans, all the living creatures, and how they're all impacted. All of that has to be taken in a systemic approach that allows people to grow food to feed their family and their communities. And that's so that we're not jeopardizing our ancestral land to loans or to grants or any kind of financial commitments. The land and all the natural sources should go, or should be managed, not go, but managed by the people that live off of them, and not some conglomerate across the globe that's pushing keys on a keyboard and saying, here's how much you can produce and here's where it's going to go. So I echo what Marian said quite supportive.
For sure. Yeah, and I have talked to many technology companies, and one thing that I never hear them talk about is future generations. What are the consequences for future generations, from this technology, whatever it is, and I'm wondering, what you work with so many farmers and have started, farmers markets and really work to organize, especially young farmers. What do they sort of, maybe not fear, but what are they most skeptical about right now?
Well, I think most skeptical about right now, and it concerns all of us, is this climate crisis that we're in. Living on the edge of the Sonoran Desert, I live here in the little village of Santa Cruz, and it's right at the edge of the Rocky Mountains, where the Rocky Mountains meet the edge of the Sonoran Desert. And with the climate crisis that's occurring, there's no predictable models that really assure of how well we're going to continue to get the moisture we've gotten in the past. So a lot of the growers here are really trying to get proactive to understand what the limitations of precipitation are going to be in our region, how they're going to affect our food supply,
Right.
and how they're going to affect not only the surface water right, but also the groundwater or the subsurface waters. So there has to be an understanding of, if technology is to be used, it's to be used in a benefit that helps us mitigate the damage of these climate crises that are occurring
Absolutely.
to our regions.
Marian, I'm wondering if you can say something on that point around the climate crisis. I mean, I know, you are skeptical of technology for very valid reasons. Are there instances where you can see or, sort of anticipate how we can use technology in a way that will benefit climate policies or benefit, other policies that need to happen to prevent some of these unintended consequences Don has spoken about?
Well, I'm not sure if this is what you mean, but there have been proposals for technological solutions for sequestering carbon, for putting ice crystals in the atmosphere, and for doing things that sound really complicated. Again, I think that climate change is a societal problem. And we know that from a food system standpoint, the best thing we could do to reduce the impact of agriculture on greenhouse gas emissions is to produce less beef and to produce less waste.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two things that we as a society could do and take immediate action in order to do that. We could grow we could produce agriculture using the techniques of agroecology. That would sequester carbon more than is being done now. There are a lot of things we could do right now that don't require anything new, but there could be ways in which technology could be helpful for helping farmers produce food more regeneratively, and for, I suppose the plant-based meats or a technological approach to trying to get at the problem of the impact of raising cattle on greenhouse gas emissions. But all of us should be thinking about all of these kinds of solutions, starting with, agriculture is supposed to be responsible for roughly a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. That's huge.
Absolutely.
If we could produce our food in ways that didn't have such a big impact on climate change, that would be a big help.
For sure. I want to bring Joy Chevalier into this conversation, but Marian and Don, I have, sort of an important question to ask that I don't think gets brought up enough. If we already know what works, right? If we already know what works, why do we continue to sort of invest in technologies that we don't know that they work? But if we know that agroecology works, if we know that innovations that farmers like Don have been using for centuries work, why don't we invest in them?
There's no money in it. There's no money in doing the kinds of things that we know would work. Nobody profits from it. And our food system is designed not to feed people in a way that promotes their health and promotes the health of the environment. Our food system is designed to make profit. Not necessarily for the people who are producing the food, because they get a very, very small part of the food dollar, but for the big corporations who are involved in it. And the big corporations are looking for ways in which they can take technology and figure out some way to make a lot of money out of it.
Sure.
That's real. That money drives everything in the food system, and in a situation in which we know that small and medium-sized farms produce food that's healthier, produce foods that has less of an impact on the environment, but they don't make as much money.
Sure.
And they can hardly stay in business these days.
Absolutely. Don, would you like to comment?
I do. I also think capitalism is a big factor in it, but it's such a complex question, and it can be so detailed. So there's the capitalist part of it. Also, then there's this huge thing about the population expansion on the global level. is how are so many people going to get fed, and there's a concern that there's not enough production going out there. That myth has been disputed sometimes, but it can be taken either way, that there is, but the distribution method isn't in place to distribute the food that's there. So we take into account population growth. We're taking into account and migration on a global level because of the climate crisis that's occurring. And then we're taking in these social contexts of borders that are artificial borders that have no context on a global level at all. So I agree. There's several factors that we have to look at and then be able to address each one that allows us to be a little more progressive in our thinking.
Absolutely. I want to switch gears a little bit and make sure that Joy can talk about both her background in business and as an entrepreneur and as a food service provider. Joy, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you guys a bit now. Apologies for that.
No problem. So I'm wondering if you could describe what you've been doing since the pandemic began in your community of Austin, Texas, and whether technology has been part of that work and how you've used it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to disagree about the complexities that the culture of technology brings to the table, versus the actual technology itself and the technology process. At the end of the day, technology or making a product or making an ecosystem in a technologist's mind comes back to a triangle that's people, process, and the actual technology itself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the people and process point can get lost in that conversation. But at the Cooks Nuclear, so we're a culinary incubator, and one of the core elements of our business is we try to help make other food businesses work with our corporates or in the food services side, is to remember that triangle, that we're using technology and technology processes, which are innovative, the processes under themselves, the processes of iteration, rapid iteration, rapid fail, recover, being disruptive, or
we might have lost Joy, unfortunately, but I do like what she has to say about this triangle of people, process, and technology. And Joy, if you can come back into the conversation, feel free to interrupt us. But I think that process point, Don and Marian, is very important, and it's something I mentioned at the beginning. If there are participatory ways of working with farmers and consumers and other stakeholders, in the food system, to develop technologies that actually work. Can you see that as something that can be developed? Can we actually work with farmers from the very beginning and do these things kind of the right way, if there is a right way?
I'm going to leave this one to Don. He's the farmer. I just garden.
Don, you're on mute.
You're muted, Don.
Can't hear you.
There you go. I'm sorry about that technology piece. I go, we're all gardeners, Marian. So we're all learning. I don't know, Joy, do you want to chime in? I don't feel like we've given you enough time. I saw your picture up there. I thought you might have been connected. But there's his whole theory of appropriate technology based on needs for communities. So every community is different. Some communities really adhere to more traditional methods, as we do, by planting by the saints' days of our religion, or planting by the moon calendars. And there is some roles technology plays in that. In other areas, technology could be used in a way that allows us to be more efficient in water distribution and creating other benefits to just growing food. So there are other technologies that could be included in all these, what I call is appropriate technology, designed and based on community needs with inclusion of communities. Otherwise, it goes over our head, or it just costs too much and it doesn't benefit anybody.
Absolutely.
I think it's a good one. We absolutely need technology to purify water supplies. There's hardly a water supply in Iowa which is so polluted. The Iowa water supplies are so polluted with nitrates, runoff from big agricultural fertilizer, that people can't drink the water. And so doing something to purify water would be an enormous help. That requires a technological solution. I wish people were working on it, but again, there's no money in it. So there's no incentive for big corporations to be working on these kinds of problems. That's why we need government policy.
Absolutely. Don, do you want to comment on the water? I know that's such a big issue in where you live in New Mexico.
Yeah, the water is for fighting. There's that thing, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And anywhere in the western region of the United States, it's a Western water law, and that water law has really been beneficial to some communities and not beneficial to other communities. So, but I think that when we start to do more policy work on water, it has to be more inclusive and beneficial to the whole systems, instead of, like you're saying, just the capitalist companies that can come in and do deep wells, pump it out, and then sell it to you in a jar. I mean, that doesn't benefit anybody in the water transfer or anything, except for global corporations. But yeah, water is the biggest issue here in the Western United States, and it's becoming more and more of an issue. Not only surface water for irrigating of agricultural fields for drinking, but groundwater for other needs for the big urban areas that are building large cities in the middle of the desert. So there has to be continuous planning and readjusting of the population within our regions to adapt to those natural restraints. So,
Don makes a point that I really want to emphasize, and that is, I'm not the person that you should be asking these questions of. The people who should be asked these questions are the people who live in these communities. If we want to know where technology can be helpful, the first thing to do is to go into communities in need and ask them what they need. How can technology help them? But here again, the problem is who's going to pay for it. And that's why, I sort of laughed when I said we need government policy, but I think it's government's job to figure out what communities need and give the population what the population needs. And we know that corporations aren't going to pay for it unless there's profit in it. There's so much evidence for that, it isn't even worth discussing. And so the real question is, how do we go about getting a government that will actually listen to people in communities, ask them, and then work with them to get them what they need in what is classic public health. It's a classic public health approach, is you ask people what they need and then you try to help them get it. You don't tell them what they need. I think technology tells people what they need. It doesn't ask them.
Such a great point, Marian. And I think, you're right on target. We need to ask people what they want instead of telling them what they need. And that's been a paradigm that really needs to shift. Joy, I don't know if you're available to come back into this conversation.
Hi, hopefully you can actually hear me. I won't drop in the middle of talking.
Great. Before we turn to questions, I want to give you another from the audience, questions from the audience. I want to give you an opportunity to talk more about what the Cook's Nook does to help entrepreneurs and how technology in terms of distributing food, especially during a pandemic, has been helpful for you.
Absolutely. So I was talking about the relationship between people, process, and technology, and one of the things that that people in process can often get lost. One of the things that we did during the pandemic at our culinary incubator is to design a program that basically thinks in terms of how do you bring a new product and new technology to bear in a community and access food that may be towards the end of its commercial and retail appearing life cycle. Did that through a system of transform and then get that distributed into a shifting and brand new population of people who are now suddenly food insecure. And so that whole process, very much like product launch design, was used, technology product launch design, was used to do what we're doing, which is to feed about 3,000 folks a day in Travis County presently. And what does that mean for technology under the hood? It's not just the process that's being replicated of coming to market, but it's also the use of watching farms now get into ERPs and resource systems and providing their inventories and availability to a variety of outlets and using APIs in order to be able to do that, hooking into local distribution systems that we can now access to bring last minute food, to transform, to cook, to use. Perfectly wonderful state food. It's just reaching an end of a SKU or a SKU life cycle. And bringing that to bear in the marketplace, or working with those distributors to get it to the organizations. We create prepared meals is what we are doing. 3,000 and getting those out every day.
I'm going to interrupt you. It's becoming very hard to hear you again. I'm so sorry, but I want to, commend Joy for the work that she and her colleagues at the Cook's Nook have done during the pandemic. They in addition to, providing resources for entrepreneurs and continuing that work, they've, again, I don't know if everyone heard it, they're providing over 3,000 meals per day in Travis County in Texas. And this is, as Joy said, for folks who never had to rely on food aid before, who are out of work or, not able to find new work, those kinds of things. People who, Americans just like you and me, or I know this is a UK conference, but folks who just never had to rely on these things before. So it's a real success story, what Joy and her colleagues have been able to do. And I want to make sure that is mentioned. I want to get to some of these questions from the folks who are watching online. One of them is, how do you factor in time? Technology, the question is, technology can provide quicker fixes and regenerative processes take longer, which I feel also leads to investment in technology. So, Marian, I know we're always looking for a quick fix, right? We're looking for that silver bullet that Don mentioned. But those silver bullets we've seen in the past have not always led to, more people being fed, more people getting nutritious food, more people, making money in agriculture.
Well, the obvious example is genetically modified foods. The promise of genetically modified foods is that scientists would work on the agricultural problems of developing countries, low and middle income countries, and would create crops that could grow under extremely difficult climate conditions, not enough water, too much heat, poor soils, would help crops fix nitrogen, would do all kinds of things like that. But they never worked on those problems because there was no profit in them. I keep coming back to that. We have to have a system that pays technology companies to work on problems that will benefit society, not just problems that will benefit the companies. It's the same issue as with drug companies and lots of other companies. If you want them to create products that will benefit society, you must figure out a way to pay them to do those kinds of problems. Genetically modified foods ended up dealing mostly with problems of developed industrialized agriculture, and didn't really do anything for the developing world for that reason. So to me, this is a policy issue. If we want technology to work, we've got to assign companies and pay them to work on social problems.
I also to comment, it's not just, folks in the global South or developing countries who have been left out of these conversations or, not benefited from technologies. Indigenous folks in the United States who've also not benefited from the technology that millions, even billions of dollars are invested in them. How can we get indigenous folks to be a greater part of these conversations around technology?
I'm sorry, Danny, I'm hearing you breaking up and I just didn't hear the question.
I was trying to turn to Dawn. I'm sorry for the difficulties, everyone. We've seen, as Marian described, GMOs, biotechnology really benefit people in the developing countries. But in the United States have often been left out of these conversations. How can focus on bringing them into these?
Don, I think this one's yours. I hope you got it.
Yeah.
You're muted. You're muted, Don.
I got the gist of it a little bit. We're breaking up. I hope I'm not breaking up as bad as Danny was.
You're fine.
Okay, so I think that as you mentioned, Marian, there has been a lot of efforts, and I think about the Green Revolution and about how it was supposed to have enough food for the global level, and turns out it was a disaster in a lot of countries in India, Pakistan, and a lot of other countries. That this whole idea of growing a monocrop, it just doesn't work. It doesn't feed everybody. So I think there are examples of technology overstepping its cultural boundaries and its regional practices. But here in the United States, a lot of that technology is developed for the countries, for first world countries, and it leaves up everybody else out of the area in indigenous areas. And I don't speak for anybody other than my community and myself, and I do consider myself a person of the land. We've grown food for hundreds of years, and I continue to grow it, and I foresee my future generations also growing food for subsistence. And it's impacted us is because the technology sometimes requires a huge capital investment. And a lot of folks here in the communities are not willing to risk their ancestral lands or future generations' lands on a capital investment that can't be secured. And it's not that we don't want to participate. It's a lot of times the systems are set up not to be inclusive. In the here in the area that I'm looking at too, they talk a lot about satellite imaging, about activity with water resourcing. That doesn't work for small communities in our area. I mean, we're small in geographic. Our farmlands are always about an acre to maybe 5 acres long, so we don't fit into the U.S. model of large sustainable agriculture. So the U.S. policy is developed. We're always excluded from those types of discussions because it's not a significant amount of production that occurs to feed people on a global level. So we do get left out on that. What I do encourage people to do, and we've had some success with it here, is that we participate in the USDA minority farm programs, and we try to have our advisors participate in the advisory groups. So when laws and programs do get developed, we may sometimes be invited to have a chair at the table so our voice is heard and our needs and our concerns are heard. Not all the time does it work out the way we want, but we strive to participate as best as we can, and our representatives really understand our needs. So the other big part too, and I'm going to say it the way it is that our government has been really exclusive, or the programs, and it's changing a little bit, and that's with people of color. 99% or 98% of the resources go to people of non-color. So that gives people of color, which are the majority of small growers, less resources to work with. And that's nothing secret, and it's been litigated in the high courts all the way to Supreme Court. So I just want to say that it's not only a technology level about growing food, it's also a political and a social activity that got to occur to ensure a food and safe and healthy food system.
Absolutely. Inherent racism in the United States has contributed significantly to farmers and many BIPOC folks being left out of these conversations. I hope you can both hear me. I mean, I'm
so.
Okay, just look.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to if you.
No.
So I'm talking. Do you think the pandemic and how consumers especially think about because in some cases smaller regional systems that have kept communities fed.
Oh dear.
Okay.
I got something about the pandemic. It was very hard to hear you, Danny. I'm sorry. I think if the pandemic did any good at all, it was to reveal problems in the food supply and in the food system in the United States that most people didn't know about. I think most Americans had no idea how badly treated meatpacking workers were, had no idea how much food insecurity there was in this country, had no idea that there were supply chains that depended completely on restaurants, and if restaurants closed, that food that was going to go to them would be destroyed while they were waiting online to get handouts at food banks. I think these kinds of the importance of diet to health, the fact that people who have diet-related chronic diseases are most at risk for poor outcome from COVID-19, I think these were all revelations. Front pages of newspapers that had never been on the front pages of newspapers before. And if the pandemic did any good at all, it was to educate the public about these kinds of things, which gives me hope that we may get policy changes that will improve the situation.
I'll chime in. I'll chime into that a little bit also. Joy, are you with us? You want to answer that, or?
I don't think she can.
Okay. I'll say the pandemic has really, I've advocated for local food systems for over 50 years, and that kind of says how old I am, but that's okay, because this year with this pandemic occurring, it really woke up and it opened up people's eyes as how important it is to have a strong local food system in place. And my heart goes out to all my friends and relatives that have suffered through this viruses, and they still get up every morning and they're out there and putting the food on the table so people in urban areas can eat and our cousins can eat, and it really highlights how vulnerable the food system we have in place in our communities and in the United States. I can't speak on a global level, but it was devastating to see people standing outside the grocery store and the shelves are empty. I mean, that doesn't work. It doesn't work for me, and it shouldn't work for anybody. So if anything we've learned is that we need to really, as Marian mentioned, is we really need to look about how our policymakers and are going to address these needs for future kind of pandemics or catastrophes. And we have a small nonprofit, Green Roots Institute, and we donated close to 7,000 pounds of food to the local food pantries and the local college through a student food pantry, because the schools were closed. There was no lunches. Students didn't have any place to eat. The families didn't have any place to get food. So it reflects on what kind of a weak food system we have.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Can you guys hear me now?
Hi, can you hear me? Hey, you can hear me. I'm not sure. A bunch of questions from audience members. We can turn to those. One of them, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you. It's breaking up a little bit, but it's better.
Okay, great. So people, this is the question from our audience. People often want a quick techno fix that doesn't require deep behavioral change. How do we handle the public's enthusiasm for the novel, even when it's not a real solution to problems?
I didn't get the question, sorry. Try again.
People often that doesn't require, two questions.
I can read the question, Danielle. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Can someone come in and read?
That would help a lot.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me okay? That's all good?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, people often want a quick techno fix that doesn't require deep behavioral change. How can we handle the public's enthusiasm for the novel, even when it's not a real solution to the problems? And additionally, they say the government is complicit too. Look at the U.S. reports about leading innovations for ag, which are really awful. GM, big data, etc.
You're asking an education question about how do you educate the public about what works. You educate the public. You try to get schools to talk about these issues. You try to get the press to write about it. I mean, this is in many ways the same issue as my favorite topic, dietary supplements, where 50 to 60% of the American adult population takes dietary supplements, despite remarkably little evidence that they do any good whatsoever in making healthy people healthier. And it's healthy people who are taking the supplements. So all the education in the world isn't going to change people's supplement habits. And I don't think all the education in the world is going to change people's views of these kinds of things. What you really want is policy change, because then people don't have to think about it. And you don't have to engage in big education campaigns. You've got the policies in place. You can demonstrate that the policies work. And then you have the evidence that you need. People don't like to change behavior. It's difficult to do. Look at what's happened during the pandemic, how hard it is for everybody to sequester and isolate. Everybody has trouble with it. Everybody is depressed. Everybody is miserable. Nobody likes it. It's asking a lot. It would have been much better if we had policies that prevented the pandemic in the first place. That's a lesson that everybody has to learn. But the real question is, how do you get the government to enact the kinds of policies that you really need? And this requires grassroots organizing, grassroots community, one-on-one education, working with communities, very long, slow, and difficult process for people who are used to telling everybody what to do and what they think is right.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. I would just say that it is very difficult to handle people's expectations about the new. But one thing we do is we exalt the new, but we don't ever to report on the news results. And what exactly did the new bring, or what were the news outcomes? 90% of the time, you never hear that, because 90% of the times it does fail or it dies, right? And so if you want the public also to be educated, you've got to give both parts of that. And both parts have to be out there. The end of the news also has to be as public as, the news original PR and marketing hype that got it to be the best new thing. And I think we fail in that regard. And so we don't have any evaluation methods, and we don't have public evaluation methods, or even a persistent institutional memory about what has and what has not worked. And particularly if you want policy, you have to have that. You have to know that the new thing didn't work. The new thing is not inherently bad. Everything was new at one point. The key is whether or not you've actually recorded the outcomes and you can actually see that and make decisions upon it.
Mhm.
And we only always tell one half of the story.
Mhm.
A fantastic point. Not sure anyone can hear me.
You're okay.
Great. Great. I mean, I think that's a really good point, Joy, and thanks for bringing that up. We do need more of sort of that investigating angle to this, you know, looking and getting that data to show how things work and don't work. And I think there's been a real lack of that. You know, we only have a few minutes left, and I think policy has been such an important part of this conversation. And in the United States, where all of you are from, and I am from, we have a new administration with new, you know, folks at USDA coming in less 9 days now, or 8 days.
And are we ever counting?
So I'm wondering, you know, if you can all sort of comment on whether you think this, you know, a new administration will help or hurt some of the things that we've been talking about. Do you know, for Joy, will the technological advances that you are using and you know, teaching others to use, do you think they will get more support? And Marian and Don, do you think the practices that you've been talking about and the participatory research that needs to be done around technological innovations, do you think that will happen? Joy, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think so in this administration. I think there will be, and let's be very specific when we talk about what happens with federal dollars, how they relate to state dollars, and WIC, SNAP, being able to make purchases or access food in the system. Those dollars have a direct effect, particularly in Texas, where our school districts in part take their charge from the Commissioner of Ag Commissioner here in the state to directly to the USDA. That is a straight line. You change and improve the conversation in the USDA, that has a direct effect on your local neighborhood school. It eventually will. And for us, part of the program that we have is to actually provide caregiver meals through the school system. That would be really huge to those families. We know when children experience food insecurity, we absolutely know in larger numbers that their family and immediate extended family also experience that food insecurity as well. From a technology standpoint, I think you'll see the USDA make changes or strengthen some of the data work that they've been trying to get in the deep parts of the supply chain, and even work in price transparency. I think you'll start to see there's real value in having price transparency, which allows more food to get to market in different ways at different and better price points. I think you'll see a little bit of that start to happen behind the scenes.
Great point about transparency. Don, how do you think, you know, will the new administration and some of the policies that are already being proposed help your community, or what do you anticipate over the next, you know, several months and 4 years?
So I share Joy's kind of enthusiasm for the new administration to engage in immediate and maybe more priority type of activity that allows us to get food, like you're saying, in that food chain and get immediate results. But for long-term systemic change, that's really going to be long-term thinking around food production, how technology integrates with agriculture, and how technology integrates with communities from indigenous or people of the land communities. You know, I've done this a long time, and it's a massive pull to even start to get these huge kind of policymakers to look more directly at how these systems are working. I have some hope that when things settle down, these real conversations can occur. And so I'm being positive about it, but with a little skepticism.
Absolutely. I feel the same way, given what we've seen over the last, you know, 100 years in the last several months. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Marian, you get the last word on policy, of course.
Well, I think, it's my job to be skeptical, and I'm very skeptical about this. I think there's only one way that this new administration is going to respond to pressures for healthier, more sustainable, and more environmentally friendly diets for everybody from top to bottom in the society. And that is if there's an enormous pressure on them to do it. If the organizations that are working on these issues could get together and form large coalitions, Danny, I know this is what you're trying to do, and your work is so important for that reason. Michael Pollan wrote a very famous New York Times magazine article during the Obama administration saying that every time the food movement asked for something, there was so much pushback from the food industry that the Obamas didn't have the pressure behind them to make the kinds of decisions and enact the kinds of policies that they wanted to. The food movement doesn't exist. We have to create a food movement that does exist, where organizations that are working on all of these issues that we think are so important get together and reach common ground about a few issues that they want to work on, and go to Washington, march on the Capitol, and put pressure on this new administration, polite, organized, civilized pressure, no guns, please, but make it clear that these are issues that are important to masses of people so that the government can do what needs to be done.
So well said, Marian. And I think, another, a small bright spot from the pandemic, as you and Don and Joy pointed out earlier, is that people care more about food maybe than ever before. They've seen lines at food banks. They've seen meat processing workers, suffer tremendously. They've seen farm workers suffer tremendously. They've seen Native communities suffer tremendously. Hopefully now we can really build that food movement that is needed, that has political power, that has economic power to make that change that you described. I want to thank all of you, Joy, Marian, and Don, for your expertise today. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Thank you to the Oxford Real Farming Conference and bringing all of these experts together. And I hope you all stay safe and please wear a mask. Thank you again.